For any products regarding cannabis that you're looking at consuming, getting an analytical report is very important. This video here on DeBacco University, though, is going to provide you with an organized sequence of steps to go about how to properly read, as well as understand what those reports are actually able to tell you. All right, so here we're going to go about reading and understanding an analytical report for cannabis products. It does apply to a whole host of cannabis products, not just dry flower. So what is this certificate of analysis, typically abbreviated COA? Well, COAs are a document generated by a licensed lab that shows the analytical test results on a cannabis sample. These are used to confirm the potency as well as the purity, while also ensuring safety for consumption, and that's really important. Be aware that some states may have different testing requirements, different labs may have different layouts, but for the most part, the generalness of what I'll talk about here will be applicable. So first off, why is testing just important, just in general? Well, it provides the consumer with a report that is transparent, unbiased, and ensures a safe product in the end. So a lot of people will look at the certificate of analysis, go right to what the CBD or THC levels are and forget about the rest. Some just look at the terpenes, but there's a lot more information than just those that's important to be able to recognize. So first off, verifying an analytical lab report. So calling the lab that the product was tested by and provide them with a certificate ID. We can see a client ID, we see names, we see license numbers, we see that sample ID. All of these little numbers and letters and kind of all are important. So providing with that sample ID, kind of like right here, as shown on the certificate of analysis, which they use to verify the lab report is authentic. You can give them their sample ID and they should be able to tell you, the grower or the client ID or the date that was tested. Avoid anything that's listed as what's called an in-house test, as this has a high potential for bias. If they're testing their own product, companies are more likely to skew the numbers in their favor. Third-party lab reports usually have special markings on it, which does not allow others to duplicate, and often will have signatures also associated with them. So third-party lab testing, well, what is that kind of referring to? Why is that important? Third-party testing means that their products are tested by labs that are not affiliated with them, hence the term third-party. Just because a company mentions that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't look for the lab report to analyze before purchasing, because any product can just be tested. So making sure it's a third-party test is important. The whole purpose of getting these products tested, I should say, by third-parties labs is to show that the consistency of the product contains the actual advertised information. And also, most of all, the transparency is important. Since growing hemp and extracting CBD is a complex process, it's critical to make sure that the product of a consumer's purchasing is safe for them to ingest. And that's only possible with the confirmatory results of a third-party test. So what's some common testing terminology? As I said, different labs might use different terminology, but if you see the word, the letters ND, typically refers to as non-detectable. This non-detectable means that it does not mean it's not present, but it is not able to be detected with the equipment being used. So it's kind of below detectable levels. Now it could be 0, but it's below detectable levels. A lot of times you'll see ppm, that simply stands for parts per million. BLQ is below level of quantification. Denotes concentrations so small that they do not meet the qualifying threshold for cannabinoid content. Then there's LOQ, which is the limit of quantification. And this is the smallest concentration that can be accurately quantified. LOD is the limit of detection. And this is the smallest amount of cannabinoid or cannabinoids that can be detected by the instrument. And last, we have loss on drying. That might be stated, and that's simply test for the percentages of water content in the final product. So this gives you just an idea of some of the terminology you might see on these examples as well as others. So let's get into find the full analytical report, and this is on the consumer's kind of shoulders there. Many companies post the COAs of their products on their website for all to see, which is great. If a product does not have a COA available, it is advisable for consumers to not buy that product and is effectively untested. Usually the full COA will not be on a product's label, but the potency testing will. To view the full COA, consumers should be able to find the QR code on the label, which should take them to the company's website with the full COA. And at the very least, if this is not possible, it should be available upon request. Any consumers looking at purchasing anything cannabis related should be able to request a COA, and it should be provided to them. If it's not, I would not advise buying that particular product. Now, the cannabinoid analysis, again, some things that you might see. Well, the active ingredients in cannabis should be clearly labeled, as it ensures that growers can verify the quality of their product. So the cannabinoid analysis, and this is where a lot of consumers will look, and that's great, but just keep in mind there is more than just the cannabinoid analysis to take into consideration. And again, we're seeing some of those levels, those abbreviations mentioned here. Then we have microbial contaminations. So this is the bacteria, mold, and or yeast present in the sample. Predetermined contaminant limits are established for each expressed in what's called CFU/G, which stands for colony forming units per gram. Colony forming units per gram. An example limit would be less than 500,000 CFUs per gram, just as a random example there. Most test results simply list pass or fail as a result, meaning were they below or above that threshold. If they were above that threshold, it would be a failure test. And if they were below that threshold, they'd be getting a passing mark there. And keep in mind that just because the sample may look clean and looks moldy, just because it looks clean doesn't necessarily mean it will still pass one of these microbial tests or analyses. Then there's aflatoxins, which are very concerning. They're a type of mycotoxin produced by certain types of molds and fungi. They're very dangerous and are potent carcinogens, which is why you want to identify to ensure that your cannabis has no aflatoxins in it, to ensure that it's safe, at least for this particular category. Then the terpene profile and analysis, and this is getting a lot of popularity amongst consumers. Terpenes are a set of simple organic molecules present in living organisms. Most of the flavors and aromas of the plants derived from their terpenes. You can find lysine and thyme and hops and limonene and citrus fruits, as well as other terpenes that are not unique to cannabis, but a lot of times provided in the Cannabis Analytical Report. Plants produce terpenes naturally to attract pollinators, which is why it's found in more than just cannabis, as well as to repel predators or herbivores as well. So there are other advantages to the plants producing these. In cannabis, they've been selected for the potential for different effects or smells or aromas. There's also heavy metal testing analysis. So cannabis can be a bioaccumulator of heavy metals. These include, but not limited to, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium, and lead. Any amounts of heavy metals present will be listed here. And again, just like the microbial test, these will simply receive a pass or a fail here. So if it's below detectable levels, non-detectable, this status here would be a passing mark for the arsenic, the cadmium, the mercury, and the lead in this example. Now, there's also pesticide analysis. So this is where the challenge with pesticide residue or analysis in cannabis is the concentration difference between the pesticide residues and those co-extracted cannabinoids and terpenes. Here we're seeing units listed in the ppb. So ppm is parts per million. In this case, there needs to be sufficient sensitivity for these pesticides to the detection to the ppb or parts per billion level. So if they're going to be present in really small amounts, here we're still seeing a passing, which is great, but we have to be mindful that we're using the parts per billion unit when it comes to pesticide testing and analysis. And again, now we see a great extensive list provided here. Simply can't test for every single pesticide, so a lot of the common ones are provided here, but just keep that in mind that no lab is testing for every single possible pesticide. You want to see a comprehensive list and, of course, a passing mark for all of the pesticides tested or listed so that they're all below or non-detectable levels to get a passing mark for the pesticide test analysis.